in association with Brookdale Lunch and Meat.
Ready?
All right, APGov, welcome back. Hope you guys are good. I thought I'd do a little bit of review here for Selective Incorporation. So if I were you, I would pause the video and I would try and work through all of these terms, basically just telling the story of Selective Incorporation. I would pause the video here. I'm going to go through it now. Right, you need to be able to define civil liberties. They protect you from the government, right? Where do we find civil liberties? You find a little bit in the original Constitution. By the way, when I say that term original Constitution, I'm referring to the Constitution without the Bill of Rights. So what was ratified initially? So basically Articles 1 through 7. When we say Constitution, then we're referring to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all of the amendments. But when we say original Constitution, we're just referring to the articles. You find some civil liberties in the body of the original Constitution. So the habeas corpus, like I talked about in the last video, the no ex post facto laws, and then the bills of attainder as well. Not super important concepts there. Like I said before, we really want to emphasize the Bill of Rights when we talk about civil liberties. Not so much worried about that, but be familiar with them. All right, so again, civil liberties protect us from the government, okay? Barron versus Baltimore, this was not a required case. I put that in the text. As I was watching that video and reviewing it, I thought I better let them know that these are not required cases. So why would I tell them to you? Well, but you got to know these cases, kind of to know the story of Selective Incorporation. So not required, you're not going to write about them, but being familiar with them is important when trying to explain Selective Incorporation, right? So Barron versus Baltimore, pre-14th Amendment. Guy basically sues Maryland saying, you've hurt my business, I want compensation. He's looking at that Fifth Amendment, which the Supreme Court say. They're like, hey, listen, there's nothing in the Bill of Rights that suggests that these are applied to the states, that these civil liberties applied to the states, so you're out of luck. And basically when the Supreme Court did that, they set a legal precedent that said the Bill of Rights did not apply to the states. So did that mean states like Georgia could infringe on your free speech and free exercise of religion? Yes, it does. Most states, though, at this time, or really all states at this time, had their own constitutions that did protect those civil liberties, but there were some states that were particularly did not recognize things like free exercise of religion. Massachusetts was really considered a Christian state. Okay, then we get that 14th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment, right? That's a Civil War era amendment. It was ratified in 1867 or 1868. It was designed to protect all of these people coming out of slavery. You got 3 million people coming out of slavery. So what are they? You know, the first thing they did is the 13th Amendment, which basically gives African American males the right to vote. But then that 14th Amendment is designed to limit the power of these states to be discriminatory, because they knew these states were going to try and be discriminatory to these individuals coming out of slavery. You get the Due Process Clause in the 14th Amendment, and you get the Equal Protection Clause in the 14th Amendment. What does that Due Process Clause say? It says that states cannot deny your life, liberty, or property without due process. That key part there is states can't deny liberty. So the Supreme Court starts to hear cases where they're seeing cases deny. They're seeing states deny liberty, like free speech, like in Gitlow versus New York. And the Supreme Court says, hey, New York and other states, there's that 14th Amendment Due Process Clause that says states can't deny liberty. A basic liberty is free speech. You're on notice now. You've got to recognize that First Amendment. So through these court cases, they're called Selective Incorporation cases, we start to see that the Bill of Rights start to get applied to the states, meaning the states now have to start to recognize the Bill of Rights. All right, this is selective incorporation. All right, what is selective incorporation? It's the applying the Bill of Rights to the states through that 14th Amendment Due Process Clause. Okay, real quick, civil rights. Civil rights protect groups from discrimination. All right, if you see in that 14th Amendment, it says, the first part says, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property. That's your due process clause. Next, it says, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. Really simple way to just summarize that would be states have to treat people equally. Civil rights have been expanded and applied to the states through the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. So when I say the civil rights have been expanded, meaning expanded in the United States, and they've been applied to the states through the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause. Okay, so whereas Gitlow versus New York is we consider a selective incorporation case because you see the Supreme Court basically applying the First Amendment to the states, something like Brown versus Board of Education would be a civil rights case because what the Supreme Court's going to do is they're going to use that equal protection clause of the 14th Amendment where it says states, you got to treat people equally to desegregate the schools in the United States. All right, so a civil rights case, Brown versus Board of Education, a selective incorporation case, Gitlow versus New York. You can see the difference there, right? With Gitlow versus New York, you got a civil liberties issue. It's getting applied to the states through the due process clause. With Brown versus Board of Education, you have a civil rights issue. It's being applied to the states through the equal protection clause of the 14th Amendment. All right, so you can see that 14th Amendment and that sentence right there, that was a big game changer in the United States political system. Okay, that's really it for the notes today. I just wanted to get this down, the civil rights piece. I wanted to review what you guys got into yesterday. If you go to my Quizlet, right, this is in announcements. So find that announcement. It's one of the early ones. I put it up at the beginning of the semester. If you go to the required court cases, you're going to want to find Schenck versus United States. Check your notes versus mine. Well, here's Tinker v. Des Moines, right? So here's everything you need to know. So I'm putting this up here because I want you to go to the Quizlet. I want you to review this stuff. Tinker v. Des Moines, what's the background? Vietnam era, students want to wear black armbands to school, protesting the war. School will suspend students if they wear the armbands. Okay, really simple. What is the question? Does prohibiting students' symbolic speech violate the students' First Amendment free speech? And then the ruling, the Supreme Court rules that the students' free speech is being violated. Students and teachers do not shed free speech at school unless, this is important, unless it is a substantial disruption. Okay? So if it's going to impact the learning of others in a negative way, if it's a substantial disruption, it's not going to be constitutionally protected free speech. All right, and what you're seeing there is you're almost both seeing an expansion of free speech, but at the same time you're seeing a limitation. So it's like, yes, students, you do have your free speech in school, but it cannot cause a substantial disruption. Okay, again, this is on the Quizlet. Go take a look at this. This is a great way to review these court cases. I'm going to find Schenck versus United States. Here we go. Schenck versus United States. Schenck argues that the World War I draft is unconstitutional due to the 13th Amendment. He basically says it's involuntary servitude. Suggests individuals exercise First Amendment's rights and right Congress to repeal the draft. Government finds Schenck has violated the Espionage Act. Basically says disloyalty and refusal of duty is a crime. Schenck appeals to the Supreme Court. Okay, the question. Right, does Schenck's conviction under the Espionage Act violate his First Amendment rights? And then the ruling was, because the U.S. is at war, speech that seeks to disrupt the military is not constitutionally protected. Speech that represents a clear and present danger is not constitutionally protected. This is really important. This is called the clear and present danger test. All right, so speech incites violence, like yelling fire or something in a movie theater or bomb or something like that at an airport, that is not constitutionally protected free speech. That's a big time misconception in the United States. People will say things that are really inflammatory and perhaps incite violence in the United States, and then they say, well, I have First Amendment free speech. No, per the Supreme Court, if it represents a clear and present danger, if it's going to incite violence in some way or mayhem, it is not constitutionally protected free speech. All right, that's important to know. Okay, so those were the two court cases yesterday. I'm going to put two more of his videos on today that I want you guys to review. So you kind of got a lot coming at you today. The other thing is, this is going to be the FRQ coming at you that I want you to produce by the end of this week. All right. However, I know you guys are you're kind of itching to get into these FRQs, being that the test is an FRQ. Here's the hard thing about that. The course got redesigned 2 years ago. We just don't have a whole lot of free response questions to go off of. We've got what's in that Princeton review book. I've got what's in a review book I have of my own. Some of them I like. Some of them I think are a little too complicated. They're taking it up too much. We have the past years that were prior to the redesign, and some of them kind of fit the format. They're coming from the College Board, they're AP Gov. So I'm gonna take a look at the 2016 here and review this with you guys. We really need to kind of get into some more court cases before I can start throwing more court cases at you. Regardless, kind of relax, because after spring break, when we finish up all of the content, I'm going to spend most of my time just reviewing FRQs with you. Okay, so your videos on a daily basis will just be me getting into FRQs with you guys. All right, just as I've been doing with AP Macro. You're going to see another AP Macro one again today as well. I'm just going to review that stuff, with you guys post spring break. We just got to kind of have to get through this content first. This is a pretty good one here. It focuses on the courts. Why don't you pause the video and why don't you see if you can work out what you would say for each one of these? A is pretty straightforward, as is B and C, but D is where you kind of have to think. And this is one where kids kind of walk past the answer. They know the answer, but they don't kind of know what the College Board's asking them. So why don't you pause the video? Okay, so here's how I would answer this one. And again, this is 2017. You can go on the College Board's website, right? Here's 2017 free response questions, and they have sample responses, and then they have the scoring guidelines. So you can go on your own independently and review a lot of these. Okay, describe one constitutional provision that seeks to insulate the Supreme Court from public opinion. When they say constitutional provision, you've got to pull something out of the Constitution that is insulating the Supreme Court from public opinion. Well, what does that? The fact that in Article 3, it says they serve life terms. They're not elected. They're appointed by the president, confirmed by the Senate. They serve life terms. That insulates them from public opinion. They don't care necessarily what the public thinks. The reason being is they don't have to. They're not trying to get reelected. Identify a power exercised by the Supreme Court that acts as a check on another branch of the federal government. Judicial review. All right. Now, remember, judicial review is not in the Constitution. It's something they claimed they had in Marbury versus Madison, and we all were like, okay, cool. You've got judicial review. It says identify, but I would go ahead and just describe what judicial review is. Judicial review is the power of the courts to rule laws of Congress, actions of the president, laws of states, unconstitutional. Explain how each of the following can limit the independence of the Supreme Court, Congress. So in other words, what is here you go. This is why this is a good FRQ to review, even though we now have a redesign, and this is 2017. This is the old test. This is how they ask about checks and balances. They're not going to come out and say, how does Congress check the courts? They're going to say, how can they limit the independence of the Supreme Court? All right. In other words, how can they check the Supreme Court? What can Congress do? Well, they approve the justices. All right. And then they can impeach the judges as well. The president, how can the president limit the independence of the Supreme Court? They choose the justices. They make that nomination. You could also get into the reprieves and pardons as well. I think the clear one, though, would just be simply the fact that they can choose, the justices. You need to explain this, though. This is an explain question, right? So what I've noticed some of you guys writing, like, you're good here, but when it comes to explain, this is where you're writing to an 8-year-old, right? You are teaching this to somebody. Don't write this stuff like you're writing to an AP government teacher or a college professor. That's what's going to mess some of you guys up. You have a test that is completely FRQ. You're going to have to, when it says explain, really teach the material, okay? So don't just simply say Congress can check the court by doing this. Explain it. Teach it. Keep going. Create examples. Create hypothetical examples. Explain how the Supreme Court protects its political independence. So what is something they can do to protect their political independence? That's pretty tough. What they can do is they decide what cases they want to hear. Just because Congress would really like them to hear a particular case or the president doesn't mean they have to. So that whole writ of certiorari is one way they protect their political independence. They decide the cases they want to hear. And by deciding the cases they want to hear, they're kind of setting their own political agenda there, therefore protecting their political independence. All right, that is not the FRQ you're going to write this week. This is the FRQ you're going to write this week. All right, the balance of power between the United States national government and state governments is shaped by the Constitution and Supreme Court rulings. Describe each of the following constitutional provisions. The Supremacy Clause, right? So just describe that. The 10th Amendment, describe that. Explain how one of the following court rulings changed the balance of power between the national government and state governments. Here you go. Again, it's a explain question. So you need to explain how one of these cases shifts the balance of power between the national government and state governments. All right. Obergefell versus Hodges. If you want to write this one, you can. This is the same-sex marriage case, only a couple of years old. Well, I think about 5 years old at this point. It's using the equal protection clause for most of you guys. You know, if you want to use the Obergefell versus Hodges case, that's fine. United States versus Lopez, it's one of your required cases. So, that one should be pretty straightforward for you. Describe 2 advantages of federalism for the creation of public policy in the United States. So in other words, what is advantageous about federalism in lawmaking in the United States? Well, states can experiment, right? That allows other states to sit back and watch and be like, okay, is that a good idea? It also allows multiple access points, so laws can be more appropriate to the particular states. Go look back at your notes, advantages of federalism, and then you can write that piece there. Okay, so this is going to be your FRQ this week. I'm going to put this on Canvas today. Other than that, I want you to go look at the 2 videos I put up on the courts the court cases he's going to talk about. You got 2 more coming at you. They are both required. All right. So Schenck versus United States, required. Tinker v. Des Moines is required. I'm going to put 2 more up today as well. I want you to get those down. I'm also going to put another AP macro review up there as well. All right. That's it.